Uh, Good morning and afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Uh, uh, let's see. This is session A of the ArchivesSpace Virtual Member Forum, and this is our presentation, A Rainbow of Flavors, Managing an Array of Digital Content in ArchivesSpace from Accessioning through Access. Our presenting group includes Elizabeth Carron, the Senior Accessioning Archivist, and Elizabeth Peters, Lynn Moulton, and myself, Molly Aleshire, who are all Senior Processing Archivists. We are from the Burns Library at Boston College, and today we will be discussing 3 practical approaches that we take in ArchivesSpace to manage born digital and digitized content across its life cycle. From acquisitions to access, these methods help us manage and safeguard backlog. They streamline description and make content accessible. And perhaps most importantly for today, these workflows are designed to fit seamlessly into archival content management. For accessioned materials, digital objects represent complex, minimally described content in preservation storage. Digital objects provide an organized, structured way to track materials without delving into deep description. Our accessioning archivist utilizes standard naming conventions, pre-populated templates, and clear preservation workflows. For processed born digital and migrated audiovisual materials accessible only in our reading room, reinterpreted top container instances allow digital content to be requested and paged parallel to analog material requesting and retrieving. And finally, for digitized materials accessible online, digital objects connect researchers from the file description to the file viewer. These are generally materials for which a digitized version provides enhanced or expanded access, but the digital is not intended to replace the original item. These workflows stay scalable and adaptable by utilizing out-of-the-box solutions with minimal customization. Following, we will outline our strategies, their exciting benefits, and occasional shortcomings, and how other repositories can integrate them to enhance digital material management for staff and for researchers. And wanted to say that the following presentation shows a slice of work being done by the accessioning and processing archivists, but our team relies on many Boston College colleagues who support our infrastructure, image our content, migrate off media, fund our work, and provide access. We also rely on larger communities such as ArchivesSpace and AP Trust. During our discussion, we will show you demonstrations with examples from our repository and then have a Q&A session. So now here's Elizabeth Carron to tell you about accessioning born digital content.
Real quick. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can see me. I'm sharing a space with my colleague, Elizabeth Peters. We were so excited for our video. We worked so hard on it. But luckily we're archivists, so we're experts in disaster recovery. So just bear with me while I walk us through my workflow. That is another aspect that is luckily for disaster recovery in this situation. We do this work all the time, and it's pretty operational for us. So I'm excited to show this to you. As accessioning archivist, I work with materials that are minimally described. The materials I deal with are, they're brief, they're abstracts almost. So when we talk about digital objects for accessioning, we are actually referring to very complex but minimally described content that is being managed in a preservation environment. I'm going to kind of move you over here to browse to see what this might look like. So we got our browse, when you browse for digital objects, what you can see, and I apologize, I'm having a little trouble because I have your pictures in my in my area. So give me 1 second as my mouse moves kind of bananas. But over here you should have you see published materials, and it's true. So that's how an easy way for you to be able to tell when you're in ArchivesSpace to tell that something is published and it's going to be associated with a processed collection. One thing about Burns Library is I know some institutions make their accession records public. We don't do that. We have a lot of really excellent reasons. It was a conversation we had, and if you would like to talk more afterwards about why we choose to restrict our accession records, I'm happy to do that. But I will say it makes it a lot easier to find digital objects associated with accessions. False, it's not published. You'll notice here, so yes, you can look at publish and you can see that it's not published. So it's accession record. That's the logical path. But we also use a really strict naming convention. Now, this naming convention is, it makes it possible for us at an easy glance. It's very human readable. It's an easy glance to see that what we're dealing with is an accession, a digital object associated with an accession. It also really supports our ability to do an audit of our backlog. A lot of folks, we deal with digital materials because they're invisible. They're not really. They're objects just like a box in a hallway, which hopefully doesn't last there too long. But this is how we're able to sort of manage our ability to see at a glance what is accession materials. It also gives us an opportunity to do periodic audits of the integrity of the data. So for example, if we're looking at the accessions, the digital objects, and we know something was processed, but yet there's still a digital object here, that is a signal for us to go and review both our preservation storage environments to make sure that the SIPs have been deleted, but also to make sure that we have fully cleaned up our records. I'm going to bring us to an example. I think that might be the easiest thing for all of you to see. I'm going to pull up some accessions from the Haley House collection. Now, we are an ArchivesSpace test instance here, so our data, of course, is a bit out of date. The Haley House collection has been processed and it is available. So the cool thing is, after this, you can go to our PUI at findingaids.bc.edu to see what the final product looks like. It has a name, but I just refer to our PUI by its URL. It's just a lot easier to say. I'm going to pick, what's a good accession? This one, Haley House Records from 2023. There was 6.25 gigabytes. Now, one thing, I'm going to point out a few things that might be a bit obvious, because I know for some people, when I talk about how I'm using one digital object for one accession record, and I'm describing a whole bunch of materials, that may not jive with you. We are archivists. We want to know what's in the bag. We want to know what we're managing. So we do this in a couple ways through the accession record. And you'll notice here, content description. This is a pretty detailed abstract. I am a huge fan of detailed abstracts. You'll never see something from me that says book 1960. In fact, I get told fewer paragraphs. Another area that we utilize is external documents. So you can see here, I post or I paste our file paths to our internal servers. We have switched over to an electronic record keeping environment during COVID, for obvious reasons. But this is actually a really good way. So our processing archivists, they can just copy the path and then go into our local server to find the devised inventory. Now, in this particular case, I did make a decision to make a file level inventory. I use tree size. Personally, that's my favorite. And in this particular case, I made decisions that this accession warranted that level of description. But that said, this actually means that our single digital object that is minimally described, we have a lot of description. Now, the thing that is you all want to see is how we manage digital objects through the accession record. So you see here is our human readable naming convention, and here is obviously the link to the digital object record. Oops. Not my computer, so give me 1 second. And voila, this is what a digital object looks like for accession records. So we have the title, which I've talked about a few times now. We get a unique identifier. This unique identifier is supplied to me by the digital archive specialist. He and I work in tandem at the point of accessioning so that digital materials aren't sitting in an email. They're not sitting in Google Drive. They're not on some hard drive in a box somewhere. We do this upfront. That is how we have determined preservation will work for our digital materials or content. Also down here, we have our file versions. We have 2 file versions. We manage our SIPs, or submission information packages. We manage them in 2 different locations. Our first location is going to be a local server. It's Ultra here. And this is a preservation light environment. The copy that's here is the one that the processing archivists are going to be working from. We also keep a copy in our dark archive. We use AP Trust. We're a sustaining member. So if you would like to learn more about AP Trust, come talk to us about that too. But the thing about, again, redundancy, disaster recovery, best practice, having an extra copy, all the things that archivists know. Once the content has been processed, we produce an APE, archival information package, and that is the thing we want to preserve in perpetuity. So we do have a feedback loop that comes back, and we delete this content from these locations, and then we no longer have a digital object. So we go back to the accession record, possibly, maybe. What we would end up doing to wrap the succession record up to get to fully tell us that a digital object no longer exists is we will delete the digital object. Even though we're deleting the digital object, the extent remains the same because it's good practice to know what we received. And that is the same for analog accessions as well. One more thing before I turn this over to Elizabeth Peters is that if no one's ever told you this before, use the pre-populated template function. There's no shame in it. I have it set up for accession records and digital objects. I average about 175 to 250 new accessions every year since the last 4 years. That's not counting all the legacy accessions that I help remediate. Data entry is repetitive. Do yourself a favor and really explore pre-populated templates that will just ensure data consistency. And also it's a good reminder that maybe there's a blank you haven't filled. All right.
All right. Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm gonna stop sharing and reshare a different window. So I need that one. All righty. Hello again. I'm Elizabeth Peters, and I'm one of the processing archivists at Burns. So I'm going to talk a little bit about processed born digital and migrated audiovisual content that is accessible only in our reading room, so as opposed to online or elsewhere. So this material we use top container instances to allow digital content to be requested and paged in a similar way to analog material. So this is different from what you might expect because there's an obvious connection from digitized content to using digital objects. But in our case, there are two problems that we see with this approach. So firstly, digital objects are primarily useful for providing links to content. We don't currently have a DAMS or a system like Preservica or Archivematica. So our digital content doesn't have a URL. So we can't add it to a digital object. Instead, we create this preservation bag that we put into AP Trust and access copies stored on our local servers. Second issue is that digital objects don't allow for researcher requesting in the same way that container instances do. So we could use the digital objects to store pathways to each file on the local server, but this would mean that getting access to that would require our public services staff to do a lot of steps, which is burdensome to them and leaves a lot of room for error. So instead, we decided to treat digital content that is accessible in the reading room in the same way that we would treat analog content accessible in the same way. So we create a container instance for the digital folder on our access server. We got this idea originally from the team at Duke and then adapted it slightly to fit our particular situation. So we have three major questions we have to answer in order to make this work. The first is, what is the container profile of a digital folder? The second is, what is the container type and number? And the third is, how do we record the location of a digital container? So here is an example of an archival object that has digital content, or digitized content in this case, that is recorded as a container instance. So I'm going to open that up. There we go. So we created a container profile called a virtual box. It has dimensions of 0 because it doesn't have any physical dimensions. And this sort of signals to a researcher that something digital is happening. It's a virtual box, but it also doesn't mess with our use of the extent calculator at the collection level because it doesn't add any additional extents. For the identifier, we use the same information across platforms. So we repeat it for the ArchivesSpace instance, the preservation copy file name, and the access copy file name. We use the ArchivesSpace primary key, which is easily findable in the URL. And that number we obviously copy across all of the places we need to use it. We call the container type digital content number. And at the AO level, we include a conditions governing access note that references the digital content number and how to request it. For the location of digital content, sorry, I'm switching back and forth. For the location of the digital content, we created a separate building called the access server, which points to our access server, and it signals to the reading room that here it's the same as you would go to a shelf. Here's this virtual shelf that you go to access this material. Then to tie up this whole process, we create an event at the collection level with the type preservation. And this event records the path to our two preservation locations, the resource the preserved content belongs to, the staff members who carried out the work, and when the work was completed. And one last thing. There we go. As a researcher, the access pathway is exactly the same as it would be for analog content. There's a request button that they press, the request goes through to our public services team, and they can page that material for the researcher. In general, we found that making our workflows for analog and digitized content as similar as possible prevents mishaps and allows us to pivot more smoothly when we need to, since we only need to learn and adapt one workflow instead of multiple. This approach still requires staff to work across systems that don't link together, but the use of unique identifiers allows us to do so with minimal room for error. All right.
We have one more section. Please bear with us. We're going to get set up. Our colleague, Lynn Moulton, is out of the office today, and we're going to be taking over her part. She is representing, because we're going to send you the video. So she is representing how we manage digitized content through DOs. So I did accession content. Emma's doing born digital content, and this next section is going to be about digitized content. We get a lot of screens to go through, though.
And we're going to share that one. All right. So here's our last section. So for nearly 3 decades, Boston College libraries have been digitally imaging archival material and putting images online. During that time, the systems and access approaches have changed, but the constant has been an ever-growing body of facsimiles of archival materials that are accessible online. We're now at the point that the description and primary discovery point is within the context of the archival collection. We use the ASpace PUI for access, which is super exciting. For these digitized archival materials, we use ArchivesSpace digital objects to connect researchers from the file description to the viewer. So our viewer, we use a Mirador IIIF viewer. These are generally materials for which the digitized version provides enhanced or expanded access. The digital is not intended to fully replace access to the original item, which is different from our migrated audiovisual materials, which we talked about previously, access for those is through the digital surrogate exclusively. Because of the value of described archival content, and because we want to support researchers being able to toggle between the online item to requesting further materials to access in person, we really appreciate ArchivesSpace growing capacity to represent digital objects within collections. So this is a fairly vanilla use of digital objects, but we thought we would go through it just to tie all of our uses of the software together. So this is an example of a digital object within one of our presidential collections. It is a letter with a photograph. For the digital object itself, here we are. We pull the title of the digital object from the archival object title, so we can make sure that those are human readable to be connected. The identifier, we use the collection number plus the primary key of the archival object, which is another sort of safeguard for helping us keep these things tied together. These are published, unlike the accessioned digital objects, so that once the images and the manifest are in our viewer, we can link them and people can see the preview in ArchivesSpace and then link out to the viewer for the entire image. The dates come from the archival object dates. A representative file version is the thumbnail. And so that's the one that a researcher would see in the PUI when they're browsing these materials. So we currently use handles. The URL would have to be replaced if we change systems, but because we're using these handles, we can make that change fairly systematically. These are published and representative. They click on load, and all of this together gives us this visible thumbnail on the AO and the DO in the PUI. The non-representative file version is the actual link to our IIIF viewer. This is also published, but because it's linking out to the viewer, it wouldn't really work as a thumbnail, which is why we have the other representative version. Okay. And I can show you what it looks like in our PUI. There it is. So we have a thumbnail that's viewable. If you click through, it will get you directly to our viewer, which is super exciting, super easy for researchers. We love it. So we don't currently have a DAMS, but so we've built our usage flexibly and consistently so that we can support connection to additional systems in the future. We can sort of bring all of our systems, because they don't link, we can bring them together through the use of primary keys and other sort of redundant ways of making sure that things stay together. Using permanent URLs, so our handles, mean that future redirects will be simplified. And this approach generally reduces steps for a user to get from discovering the finding aid to viewing the actual digitized material. This particular usage is technically pretty simple and uses out-of-the-box functionality for the most part in ArchivesSpace, which lets us ask a bit less of our partners in the library in this case, and our digital production partners as well. The broader workflow here makes heavy use of the bulk edit spreadsheet and also the DO bulk import spreadsheet, which is pretty great. So alongside our special collections public service colleagues, we're really leaning into the ASpace PUI for discovery. So because we're describing things in finding aids at a file level rather than an item level, it means that our digital objects are also at the file level, which makes access easier and makes our description easier, keeps everything in context. This also allows us to take advantage of the inheritance of information from parent entities, and to spend less time re-articulating all of that information for each AO and each digital object. Given the ever-growing scale of archival collections and digital components, this feels like the right middle road of describing things well and making them accessible. All of our approaches lean pretty heavily on this philosophy. So thank you for bearing with us with our transitions and for joining us in this exploration, and we'd love to answer some questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There's already a comment in the chat congratulating you on that excellent pivot. And I have to say that was awesome. Really well done. And thank you so much for bearing with us for our technical hiccups. That was wonderful. We're a little behind time, but we do have one question that just popped up in the chat. Well, we have two questions. But one is, can you explain again why you use physical container instances instead of digital object instances?
Yes. So we're using physical container instances only for materials that are available in the reading room rather than through an online viewer. And the reasoning for this is there is no link. And so if a researcher saw that there was a digital object, they wouldn't be able to access it because it's not requestable we use Aeon for requesting. So it's not, the digital objects are not requestable through Aeon. There's no link for them to click to get to an online viewer. So it's confusing on that end. And then secondly, because the way that the public services staff serve up that material is actually the same as for analog materials, right? They're going to page something from either a virtual or a physical shelf. They are bringing it to the reading room and then giving it to the researcher there. We figured that making those processes as similar as possible sort of streamlines that process for them as well. And we like working well with our colleagues. So it's sort of, you think about it in a slightly different way. If we think about the server as sort of, we call it our virtual stacks. If we think about it as digital stacks, it makes a little bit more sense.
That's interesting.
Does
Thank
that
you.
answer the question?
Yeah, that was great.
Great.
We are getting a few more questions in the chat, but in the interest of time, we're going to pause the Q&A and go ahead and move into a break. But if you could answer those questions, you do have the ability to type answers. There's two questions specifically around like using Aeon and using a DAMs. And then there's also a question of if you would be willing to share your documentation about your workflows for this. If that is the case, please, and I'm seeing nods, please do share those with us. And again, we will, now I'm excited to see this video. So we'll definitely include a recording, your recording, as well as any documentation that you can share about this in the event wiki. So for everyone who has questions and really wants to see this recording, that will be in the wiki. And again, please continue to post questions in the Q&A and conversation can continue there. But we're going to go ahead and move into a break. We are a little bit behind schedule, but we're going to go ahead and take our full 10-minute break. It is 10 minutes after the hour now. We are going to come back at 20 minutes after the hour for our next presentation. Again, thank you so much. That was great. Thank you for making that pivot, and I will see you all again in 10 minutes.